Ukraine. Ukraine's biggest issue right now is the war with Russia. Since the full-scale invasion, the country has had to defend its land while keeping normal life alive under constant pressure. The front line changes, but the danger reaches far beyond it. Power stations, homes, schools, ports, and aid routes can all become targets, so cities away from the trenches still live with air alerts and sudden strikes. What makes Ukraine's situation different is that it is about more than territory. It is about whether a country can choose its own future without being forced under a stronger neighbor's control. Ukraine matters because its grain affects food prices, its energy systems affect Europe, and its survival shapes how the world responds to force. Palestine. Palestine's biggest issue right now is the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. Years of blockade, failed peace efforts, political division, and repeated wars had already made life fragile, but the latest destruction pushed Gaza into a deeper emergency. Many families have been displaced more than once, moving from one crowded shelter to another without knowing where safety is. Hospitals, water systems, schools, and neighborhoods have been badly damaged, while food and medical access remain under pressure. What makes this crisis so powerful is that it is both immediate and historical. It is about people trying to survive today, but also about decades of occupation, security fears, land disputes, and failed negotiations. Gaza matters because it shapes Middle Eastern politics and the global debate over civilians in war.
Sudan. Sudan's biggest issue right now is civil war. The fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces began in 2023, but the causes go back to years of military rule, weak institutions, and unfinished hopes after the fall of Omar al-Bashir. The war has torn through cities, farms, markets, and hospitals, leaving millions displaced and many others facing hunger. Sudan's crisis is especially dangerous because it can fade from world attention even while the suffering grows. It is one of the largest displacement crises on Earth, but often gets less focus than conflicts with stronger international backers. Sudan matters because it sits between North Africa, the Red Sea, and the Horn of Africa, so its collapse can spread through migration, food supply, and regional instability. Haiti. Haiti's biggest issue right now is gang control and political collapse. In parts of Port-au-Prince and beyond, armed groups can block roads, attack neighborhoods, shut down services, and make ordinary movement dangerous. For many people, the problem is not only violence. It is the feeling that there is no reliable authority to turn to when schools close, hospitals struggle, or families flee. Haiti's crisis has deep roots, including poverty, corruption, weak institutions, disasters, and a long history of foreign pressure. But the current situation is different because gangs are not just hiding from the state, in some areas, they are replacing it. Haiti matters because it shows how quickly a security problem can become social collapse when people cannot trust the police, courts, or government.
Myanmar. Myanmar's biggest issue right now is the civil war that followed the 2021 military coup. The military removed the elected government, but instead of taking control smoothly, it triggered a nationwide resistance movement. Armed ethnic organizations, local defense forces, and anti-coup groups now challenge the military in many areas. Myanmar was already divided by decades of ethnic conflict, so the coup connected older wars with a newer struggle against military rule. Some communities are fighting for democracy, some for autonomy, and some simply to survive airstrikes, landmines, and economic collapse. Myanmar matters because it sits between India, China, and Southeast Asia, and its instability affects refugees, border trade, organized crime, and regional diplomacy. Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Democratic Republic of the Congo's biggest issue right now is armed conflict in the east. Groups such as M23 and other militias fight for territory, influence, trade routes, and access to mineral-rich areas. The roots go back to regional wars in the 1990s, the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide, weak state control, and competition over resources. What makes the DRC so important is the contrast between its wealth and its suffering. The country holds minerals used in phones, batteries, and modern technology, yet many communities near those resources face violence, displacement, disease outbreaks, and poverty. The DRC matters because the world depends on its minerals, while local people often pay the price.
China. China's biggest issue right now is economic slowdown. For decades, China grew so fast that it changed the global economy, becoming a manufacturing giant and lifting huge numbers of people out of poverty. Now that model is under pressure. The property sector has weakened, local governments carry heavy debt, young workers face uncertainty, and consumers are more careful with money. What makes China's challenge different is scale. A slowdown there does not stay inside China. It affects factories, shipping, technology, raw materials, and countries tied to Chinese demand. The issue is also political, because much public trust was built on rising living standards. When it slows down, the effects move everywhere. United States. The United States' biggest issue right now is affordability mixed with political division. Many people feel squeezed by housing, healthcare, groceries, insurance, education, and debt, even when the economy looks strong on paper. At the same time, the country is deeply divided over immigration, elections, guns, climate, crime, and the role of government. What makes the American problem different is that domestic frustration quickly becomes an international issue. Elections can change alliances, trade policy, climate action, military support, and global markets. The deeper problem is trust. Many Americans do not only disagree about solutions, they disagree about reality itself. A powerful country becomes harder to lead when the public feels divided.
India. India's biggest issue right now is pollution and extreme heat putting pressure on a massive population. India is growing quickly, with expanding cities, a young workforce, and a rising global role. But daily life in many areas is shaped by dangerous air, heat waves, water stress, and extreme weather. In a country of India's size, even a local emergency can affect millions of people. Outdoor workers, children, elderly people, farmers, and families in crowded cities are often hit first. What makes this issue different is that it touches health, jobs, school days, food production, electricity demand, and economic growth. India matters because it will help shape the future of the planet, and how it balances growth with climate protection will affect everyone. Mexico. Mexico's biggest issue right now is organized crime and disappearances. Cartels and criminal networks fight for smuggling routes, territory, illegal markets, and influence over local power. The violence grew sharply after the government's war on drugs began in the mid-2000s, but the crisis became much bigger than drugs alone. Extortion, kidnapping, fuel theft, human trafficking, and control of local economies all became part of the picture. One of the most painful parts is the number of missing people. Families, often led by mothers, search fields, deserts, and hidden graves because official investigations are slow or incomplete. Mexico matters because its crisis mixes organized crime, corruption, fear, and impunity right next to the United States.
Yemen. Yemen's biggest issue right now is hunger after years of war. The conflict began as a local political crisis, but it grew into a regional struggle involving rival authorities, outside powers, airstrikes, blockades, and shifting front lines. Even when fighting becomes less intense in some places, the damage remains. Families face high food prices, weak healthcare, poor water access, and limited jobs. Children are especially vulnerable because malnutrition can harm the body and brain for life. What makes Yemen different is that the crisis has lasted so long that emergency conditions have become normal for millions. Hunger is not just a shortage, it is part of a broken economy and a broken state. Yemen shows how war keeps killing after headlines fade.
Afghanistan. Afghanistan's biggest issue right now is isolation under Taliban rule. Since the Taliban returned to power in 2021, the country has faced a deep economic and humanitarian crisis, while women and girls have lost basic freedoms. Restrictions on education, work, public life, and movement do not only affect individual rights. They weaken the whole country because half the population is pushed away from schools, jobs, and decision-making. Afghanistan's problems also come from decades of war, foreign intervention, drought, corruption, and dependence on aid. What makes the current situation different is the combination of poverty and exclusion. Many countries do not fully recognize the Taliban government, but ordinary Afghans still need food, medicine, and services.
Venezuela. Venezuela's biggest issue right now is the long collapse of living standards that pushed millions of people to leave. The country has some of the largest oil reserves in the world, but years of mismanagement, corruption, sanctions, political conflict, and economic breakdown damaged the systems that once supported daily life. Inflation, low wages, weak public services, and limited opportunities made survival difficult for many families. What makes Venezuela's crisis different is its huge migration. Millions of Venezuelans now live across Latin America and beyond, changing neighboring countries too. For those who stay, the problem is slow exhaustion, hospitals without enough supplies, schools under pressure, and salaries that do not match the cost of living. Syria. Syria's biggest issue right now is trying to recover from a war that changed an entire generation. After more than a decade of conflict, many cities, farms, roads, hospitals, and schools remain damaged, while millions of Syrians are still displaced inside the country or living as refugees abroad. Even where front lines are quieter, daily life is shaped by poverty, broken services, food insecurity, and the challenge of returning home to places that may no longer have jobs or safe housing. What makes Syria's situation different is that the emergency phase never fully ended before recovery began. People are expected to rebuild while still facing instability and shortages. Syria matters because it shows how hard it is for a country to come back after years of destruction.
Pakistan. Pakistan's biggest issue right now is economic pressure combined with climate risk. The country has a young and growing population, but it needs millions of jobs, stronger public services, and long-term reforms to keep that population from becoming a source of instability. At the same time, Pakistan is highly exposed to floods, heat, water stress, and other climate shocks. When floods damage farms, roads, homes, and power systems, the economy feels it through food prices, debt pressure, and lost income. What makes Pakistan's challenge different is that economic and climate problems feed each other. A weak economy makes it harder to prepare for disasters, and disasters make the economy weaker again. Pakistan matters because its stability affects security, migration, and millions of young people.